In this episode, we get into the mind of a black man as I attempt to educate and explain what it's like to be a black man in America. Hello, my friends. My name is 𝗪𝗚𝗘𝗧𝗘, and I'm the Note to Self guy. If this is your first time visiting my channel, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch me today. If you like what you see, please feel free to leave a like. By all means, leave a comment. And if you really love what you're hearing today, please consider subscribing to the channel. Now, today's episode is a very, very important episode. It's entitled, Attention All White People. Now, all white lives matter, but not to the exclusion of black lives. In fact, all lives matter. But I'm here to talk about specifically why black lives matter. This video is for everyone, but I am targeting my white brothers and sisters out there. It is meant to educate you as I share my real life experiences as a black man growing up in America. I will discuss racism, discrimination, social injustice, my encounters with the police, and the George Floyd case. Now, to my white brothers and sisters out there, it is almost impossible for you to truly understand what it is like to live in this country as a black person. Why? Because you're not black. It's no different than me trying to fully understand what it's like to give birth to a child. I can't do it because I'm not a woman. But what I can do is that I can listen attentively to what she's saying so that I can better understand what it's all about, what that pain's like. And the only way I can do that is if I really take the time to listen to what she has to say. Similarly, this is why it is important for you to listen to me so that you can better understand how it is that I feel. Before we begin, I should explain to you who it is that I am. Again, my name is 𝗪𝗚𝗘𝗧𝗘. I am unapologetically Christian. I am college educated. I'm an Air Force veteran. I've been married for 23 years. I have 2 college-age children, and I have a pretty good reputation in the community. Okay, now let's hear my story. Now, this first incident has happened to me several times. I get into an elevator, and I'm dressed nicely, and there is an elderly white woman in the elevator. So I say to her, "Hello, ma'am, how are you today?" In a very polite and calm manner. She looks at me, kind of frowns up. She clutches a purse and moves to the opposite end of the elevator. Now, I could better understand this if this was during COVID time, but this is prior to COVID. And it's almost as if she thought that I was going to rob her, and all I ever said to her was, "Hello." And this situation has happened to me many times. So if this happened to you, how would you feel? This is why Black Lives Matter. In another situation, and again, this has happened to me many times before. I'm out shopping at one of these, higher end retail stores, or it could be just a regular store. And I'm walking around shopping, and again, I'm dressed appropriately. My pants are not hanging off my butt. I am, polite, and I'm walking around just shopping, trying to find, something. And everywhere I go, there is a security guard watching my every move, almost as if this person is like my shadow. When I look up, there they are. And then every time I look up and see them, they give me kind of like a little, snarly look, as if I'm going to steal something. Do you realize how uncomfortable that is? And that happens to me a lot, simply because of the color of my skin. So if this happened to you, how would you feel? This is why Black Lives Matter. Many years ago, when I was a student at Howard University, I had just gotten out the military. And I must admit, I was wrong, guilty as charged. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. I had made a prohibited left turn. I did not see the sign. The cop pulled me over. And as the cop was walking up to my car, I thought to myself, now I want to make sure that I don't get myself shot. So what do? I put my hand on the steering wheel like this here. I made sure I had my license and registration out. Now I have to say, as a black man in this country, I had to give myself the talk. Now, most black people know what I'm talking about when I mean the talk. Now, people, I'm not talking about the birds and the bees. I'm talking about what do you do when the cops pull you over. Now, to my white brothers and sisters out there, you may not have to have this conversation with your children. But to any black families out there, we understand that when the cops pull you over, there are certain things that you have to do so that you don't get yourself shot. I've always told my son, look here, don't be smarting off at the cops. Yes, sir. No, sir. And if you have to take a take a punch to the face, you take a punch to the face, or if you have to get thrown in jail, no problem. I can come get you out of jail. But if you get yourself killed, I cannot resurrect the dead. So please don't do that. So don't give this cop any reason why they should feel as if they need to use deadly force on you. So again, I'm thinking about all this stuff before the cop shows up. So when the cop pulls up, when he comes up to the door, my hands are like this here, and he asks for my license and registration. So I give it to him, and he says, "Hey, do you realize that your license are expired?" I said to him, "Yes, sir, I do. I just got out the military less than 30 days ago. And sir, while you're in the military, there's leeway where they give you, 2, 3, 6 months to get your license updated. That's just something that they did back then." This gentleman proceeded to call for backup. Now keep in mind now, it's just me and my girlfriend there. I'm being very polite, and all I did was just, granted, I made a prohibited left turn, which meant that I should have gotten a ticket, and maybe he should have said, "Okay, young man, you should have your girlfriend drive home, and since you're driving on essentially an expired license." All right, but no, that's not what he did. He called for backup. I look around, there's 3 police cars behind, and then also there is a paddy wagon that shows up. This guy then tells me to get outside the car, so I assume the position, right, like I'm some sort of criminal. He pats me down, and then they proceed to put me in a paddy wagon. Now I kind of joked with the guy and said, "Officer, honestly, the only time I've ever seen a paddy wagon was on a cartoon." So this was a brand new experience for me because, again, I had never been in trouble. So they then take me down to the police station. They fingerprint me, and then they lock my behind up in a jail cell, for which I was in there for about 20 minutes. And then they tell my girlfriend, "Listen, if you go get $50, we will let him out of here." And you know what they did? She went and got the $50, and they did, in fact, let me out. And they didn't even give me a ticket. They said, "You know what? We're going to give you a warning. You pay this $50 and you can go." Now, I could have argued and said, "Well, I don't understand why you locked me up in the first place. You didn't even give me a ticket, but yet you want me to pay $50 for what?" But hey, there's no sense in arguing. I just wanted to get out of there. All right. Now, back then, if you can recall, and this is like 20-something years ago, maybe longer than that. Back then on job applications, it used to say, "Have you been arrested?" Now, they found that to be discriminatory because society realized that the black and brown people, we tend to get arrested more than anybody else. And as you can tell from my story, this is a bunch of bullcrap as to why I was arrested. So think about this. Now, God has blessed me with some pretty good jobs over the years. Now, what if that incident had been the reason why I never got some of these jobs? Just because I was pulled over and fingerprinted for something that didn't even make any kind of sense. Now, I say to you, if this happened to you, how would you feel? This is why Black Lives Matter. So I'm a student at Howard University, and now it's time to secure an internship. So like any other student, I'm signing up for all types of intern interviews because, again, I want to be hired for the summertime. But as I'm signing up for these internships, I noticed that on the announcements, it says that you have to have a 3.5 GPA or greater just to even interview. I thought to myself, that's a little bit strange, but I guess they're trying to get the best of the best. So I thought at the time. So I wound up interviewing for a company, and fortunately I was able to get that job. But then I later found out that very same company, when they went to schools like the University of Maryland, the GPA requirement was a 3.0, not a 3.5 as it was at Howard. Now let me tell you something. Anybody that knows anything about academia knows that Howard University has great street cred. I mean, that school produces some outstanding people where the students have gone on to do great and wonderful things and have had a huge impact on our society. So to essentially downgrade Howard by saying that, you have to have at least a 3.5 before we'd even look at you, to me, was a little bit discriminatory in nature because, again, Howard has a wonderful story to tell. How would you feel if that happened to you? This is why Black Lives Matter. So I get the job, and I was so happy that after a year later, I was able to come back to Howard's campus and actually do some interviewing myself. So now I'm on the other side of the desk, having an opportunity to hire some students at Howard University. So we go through this series of interviews at different colleges. We get to our corporate office, and we begin to discuss the various candidates for purposes of hiring them. And in the meeting, a high-level executive makes the comment about one particular candidate. He says, "Oh, well, he's a pretty good minority candidate." So I'm looking at him like, what? A pretty good minority candidate? So fortunately, one of the other managers in the room boldly corrects the executive, and he says, "No, sir, he's a very good candidate, period." And I bring this up because I want to understand the mindset of some people. The man could have just said he's a good candidate and left it at that. But no, he had to put race in this equation where it really didn't need to even be there whatsoever. So the question then becomes, what if this happened to you? This is why Black Lives Matter. So one day I'm flying into Memphis, Tennessee, flying in for a corporate meeting, and I get a rent-a-car. So I'm on my way to the corporate office, and I get pulled over by the cops. Now again, I remember my training. Hands on the steering wheel, license and registration. The guy comes up, and I can see the evil. He had an evil spirit on him. I can actually see it. The guy was angry. He was yelling at me, license and registration. And I gave it to him. And he said, "Listen, do you know why we pulled you over?" I said, "No, sir, I do not. Your tags are expired." I said, "Officer, here is my paperwork. Do you mind if I reach for it?" So I reached for it. I got my paperwork, showed it to him. "Officer, I just rented this car 20 minutes ago. So quite frankly, sir, I did not know that the tags were expired. And to be honest with you, I didn't bother to check. I mean, who does? Have you ever checked the tags when you rented a car to see if the tags were expired?" And you know, this guy was getting ready to ask me to step outside of the car. Fortunately, they got a call on the radio about there was some emergency going on, so they had to leave. So they let me go. But the guy looked at me with a very evil and menacing look, and he said, "Don't you ever let me catch you again out here driving with an expired tag, because the next time you're going to jail." And I said, "Okay, sir, I'll go right back to the airport, and I'll get that straightened out." Totally unnecessary. When I gave the guy the registration and the leasing agreement, he could have said, "Okay, I understand," and he could have said to me, "Please go back and get this straightened out." And I'd have gladly did it, because that's what I was going to do anyway. If this happened to you, how would you feel? This is why Black Lives Matter. So one day I'm working out in my yard, and we had just gotten a sprinkler system. So I'm trying to get this thing to work, and a neighbor of mine comes up. Now keep in mind, we live in a pretty nice neighborhood. So a neighbor of mine comes up, and he begins to, have small talk with me. And then he says to me, again, I didn't know this dude. So he comes to me and he says, "Well, how much for the irrigation system?" So I guess he thought that I was the yard man. So I said, "Well, this dude is awfully nosy, but I humor him." So I gave him like a range or something like that as to what it costs. And then as I began to talk to this guy, I made the comment, "Well, yeah, my wife and I have been living here for since January." He looks at me, he turns his head like this, and he says, "You live here?" And I looked at him, I turned my head like this, "Yes, I do." And then of course the questions then began to come from him. "So what do you do? What do you do for a living?" And all this other kind of foolishness, And I started to be a smart butt and say, "Well, sir, I work in street pharmaceutical sales, and my wife is a high-priced call girl." I started to tell him that, but no, I took the high road and just kind of told him that, hey, that I'm a small businessman, yada, yada, yada. But the question is, he was questioning, how can you afford to even live in a neighborhood like this? So if this happened to you, how would you feel? This is why Black Lives Matter. I had promised my wife 10 years after we were married that I was going to get her a better diamond for her ring. So I go to a local jewelry store. I walk in, and the owner of the place was there. And I walk up to him, nicely dressed, and I say, "Sir, I'm looking for a 1 carat marquee diamond that's a certain color, a certain clarity." He looks at me and he says, do you know how much that ring would cost? I says to him, sir, I didn't ask you how much the ring costs. I asked you if you had any rings like that that you can show me. He then looks at me and says, well, I tell you what, I got some other rings over here that probably would be better suited for you. And then he then takes me over to the rings that were cloudy and of lower quality. And I'm thinking to myself, I came in here, I asked the guy to show me a certain ring, and he's already judging me, assuming that I can't afford this ring. And he then leads me to some rings that are basically junk. And I thought to myself, this doesn't make any sense. So to the question, what if this happened to you? How would you feel? This is why Black Lives Matter. So now let's talk about the George Floyd case. This is a tough one. Anybody with two eyes and is rational can see that that man was executed for the world to see. Now, the amazing thing about George is that he was compliant the entire time. Even when the guy had his knee on his neck, he was still being very polite. Yes, sir. No, sir. You know, as he pleaded for his life. And the reason why this is a little painful for me, because I got a 21-year-old son. And I have conversations with him explaining, son, if you ever get pulled over by the cops, this is what you do. And there's nothing, if that had been my son, there's nothing that I could have told him that would have saved his life. Nothing. America, that's just not right. A man should not have to lose his life just because of nothing. Now I say to you, white, black, Asian, or otherwise, if that was your son, if that was your dad, your brother, your uncle, your grandfather, how would you feel? And people, this is not just an isolated case. Every 2 weeks, every week, we're hearing about a situation where a black man or a person of color being executed or killed by cops for no good reason. Tamir Rice is one of them. And you know, the list goes on and on and on. People, this has to stop. It has to stop, people. So I say to you, if this happened to you, how would you feel? This is why Black Lives Matter. Now, let me say this to you. For those of you who are out there rioting and breaking into stores, please stop. Now, I will say this. As you look at the videotapes, the people who are doing all of this rioting and breaking into stores, it is a variety of all kinds of people. Black, white. I mean, it's some of everybody doing it. So my message is to all of you, whoever is doing it, please stop. Please stop. If you're going to make this thing right, do it the right way. Peaceful protesting is the right way to go about it. Now, on a positive note, I am encouraged. Because if you look at the diversity of those who are protesting, you see a variety of all kinds of people, all races. And not only are people protesting for the injustices to the black and brown at the hands of the police in this country, but they're doing it all around the world. So what that's telling me, and what it should be telling you, is that there are thousands, maybe millions of people who agree with the fact that the assault that black people have to deal with, black and brown have to deal with at the hands of the police is just not fair. It's not justice. So I am encouraged by that. And that is a good thing. Now, to my white brother and sister out there, I say this to you. God made us all. And when he made me, for whatever reason, he chose to put me in this caramel colored shell, of which I'm happy for. But the fact of the matter is, I'm your brother, and you are my brother, and you are my sister. And I have to say that as God is looking down on this planet, he cannot be pleased with how we are treating one another. You know, in the Bible, the word love is listed over 300 times. And in the New Testament, love one another is listed at least 100 times. So that leads me to believe that God is serious about this thing, that we should love one another. As a matter of fact, his second greatest command is for us to love thy brother as we love thyself. And it seems to me that we've made a mess of it. So the question is, why can't we love one another? Why? Why can't we do it? Love is the answer to all that ails mankind. Love is an action word. How do I know?
Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with action and in truth. 1 John chapter 3, verse 18.